Welcome to Career Insights, where we help career-driven professionals advance their career. If this is your first time here and are interested in learning the latest tips, tutorials, and exclusive interviews with senior executives and experts on their career journey, then start now by clicking that follow button. I am super excited today because we have a great guest. We have David. Sorry, my thing is not working here. We have David Shriner-Cahn. David hosts the Smashing the Plateau, and he began his professional career as a chemical engineer. He transitioned into not-for-profit sector where he has led and has been a leader and in management roles for many years. He currently is the president of 10 Strategic Partners, a company found in 2016. Why don't we come in and welcome David? David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Bernardo. Thanks for having me on.
I am super excited here. So, David, I know that you are focusing on Smashing the Plateau. Tell us a bit about your journey. How did you get to Smashing the Plateau? And I know there's also going solo, so you have a few podcasts going on, but it'd be great to know a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So as you described, Bernardo, I was trained as a chemical engineer. I worked in the private sector for a couple different mid-size engineering consulting firms. My first job was designing chemical plants, and things have not followed a particularly linear progression, which is true for most people. So I worked in that field for about 4 or 5 years, and then went into the not-for-profit sector. In my case, the trigger was right after getting a great performance review and a nice raise. A month later, I was out of a job. My boss called me into his office and he said, "David, I have good news and bad news. Good news is you're doing a great job. The bad news is you don't have a job anymore." And I did a lot of soul searching at that point. I was really blindsided, didn't see that coming, even though I should have, because the company had lost a lot of business. But I was looking for something that I would find personally more fulfilling, and that's how I ended up in the not-for-profit sector, which was a great move. I spent most of my time in leadership and management roles, as you mentioned. Learned a lot about what it takes to manage people, what it takes to build teams, what it takes to communicate. How to lead an organization, how to grow an organization. And then in 2006, I decided that I wanted to go out on my own. And it was also a pivot point in my career. And at that point, there were changes going on in my organization that had nothing to do with my performance, but looked like there might be some duplication of my skills with some changes in personnel, and in fact that job also ended. And as I said, I had thought long and hard about what I was going to do next, and was planning to go out on my own anyway, and so I did that, and 15 years later, I'm still an entrepreneur. My business has certainly changed. It also has not followed a linear progression. Initially, I was a one-person, not-for-profit management consultant, and now I spend most of my time, as you mentioned, I host 2 podcasts, Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo. So I'm responsible for creating a lot of content around what it takes to be a successful consultant, coach, solopreneur, someone who has been an expert in their field for a very long time, and then tries to make it as in their own business. There are certainly lots of challenges there. You can be really good at what you do, and you can produce great results for clients. But if you have never run a business before, or if you're really not on top of what it takes to build and grow a business, then doing great work is almost beside the point, because you actually need to have the paid work in order to have a viable business.
Yeah, and I'd say that, and thank you for sharing that. There's a level of resiliency that allows one to think about what one wants to do. And from what you were sharing from your career journey, being an entrepreneur for the last 15 years, What has been the shift for you that has helped you make that transition from being employee to an entrepreneur?
So one of the shifts is understanding that I may be good at certain things myself, but even if I am running what is primarily a solo business, I still need a team to be successful. And initially, it wasn't clear to me exactly what I needed and who might be part of that team. But over the years, I have slowly developed a really great team, and the team is one of the keys to success.
You're absolutely right. I think many times when solopreneurs, either they're just starting out, they have this feeling that they have to do everything. And many times, as a result of that, they wind up learning new skills, which is nice, but it doesn't really get them to the core as to the value that they bring as it relates to their business. So being able to have a team around them to support them in the areas that maybe not so much of excitement, that will allow them to be able to focus on that. So how does that then tie then into, because you have your Going Solo podcast, the Smashing the Plateau. Tell us, what are the differences and what one can learn from each?
Sure. So, Smashing the Plateau, which I launched in 2014, is we focus on what does it take to grow an existing business. So if you are already in business, um, let's say you've been a consultant, a coach, or you run some other kind of business, and you've been in business for several years, you have demonstrated that you are able to create some level of sustainability, you're able to pay your bills with your business, etc. But you want to take what you've created and grow it even more, or change it in any way, then we have a lot of content that will help you. Things like how to use your time more effectively, how to improve your marketing or your sales, what you need to be able to know or use in terms of technology so that your business will be better. And going solo is really about what happens at that initial stage, particularly if um, your transition from employment to entrepreneurship is triggered by a job loss late in your career, which it can be both a blessing and a challenge. The blessing is it may push you to do something that you've really wanted to do for a long time. The challenge is, unless you've actually planted a lot of seeds and put a lot of the structure in place, you may not have any paying clients right out of the gate. So you need to find a way to start to build your business in a way that's going to help you spend your time doing what you really love, what you're competent at doing, with a set of clients that need you, want you, are willing to pay for you, and that you will enjoy working with. And being able to do that and kind of rinse and repeat over and over again so that you can grow your business. That's really what going solo is about.
I like the fact that both podcasts are very specific, because sometimes some content kind of mixes in a lot of information, so it doesn't really help take a deeper dive as to the importance around the transition of being employee to entrepreneur, for whatever the reason may be, to being an entrepreneur, and how do you grow that specific business. And when I think about the Going Solo podcast that you're referring to, a lot of times, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this since you've had this podcast for a while, a lot of times people get stuck on the fact that they have to sell. And it's this kind of dirty word around what it means to grow a business or gain clients is selling, because they kind of may have this notation that it's like an old used car salesman, when in reality, we all sell. It's about networking and building relationships. And I wondered, and like to get your thoughts as to what have you found as one of the inhibitors when people go solo, especially as a part of a transition in career. What has that been like?
But right. So especially for people that have never had a sales role, the whole idea of selling can be quite daunting. Um, the thing you need to think about is your business will be a business if you're solving somebody else's problem. And if you think about any time you have made a decision to buy something, particularly when you have been relieved by just the act of finding someone who seems to be selling what you want, they're selling you a solution to a particular problem. And keep in mind, particularly for high level skills and for high achieving professionals, we have a lot of skills that have been developed over a long period of time. And the skills and the experience are not so simple to find. So you've got to understand, first of all, that you are solving a problem for someone else. And if you're able to solve a problem for somebody else, you can relieve stress, you can make them happy, you can reduce their fear. The most important thing is be clear that you're solving a problem. Just know what that problem is and who you're solving it for.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also think that it's also able to articulate how are you solving that problem as well. 'Cause I think sometimes I was actually speaking on a different app. This gentleman was presenting a question to the panel about how he does powder coating, which I'm not really sure what that I think has to do with cars. And the fact that he started doing some YouTube videos for free and all of a sudden started getting a lot of questions. And it looks like there's a business model there for him to do teaching. But a question really that he has to answer is whether or not this is something he wants to do. And why I'm bringing that up is because he unknowingly has solved a problem for people who are looking to learn about, in this instance, powder coating, and wasn't really expecting to kind of really be in that business. And that's a decision. It's a good problem to have, but it's a decision that he ultimately has to make as to whether or not does he want to go into teaching. And I like the way you're phrasing it, specifically because whether you're an employee or you are an entrepreneur, you are in the business of solutions. Like, even as an employee, you're solving a specific issue that exists. It just means that you're, on payroll to make that happen. I think the largest difference, obviously, between employee and entrepreneur is that with an entrepreneur, there are a lot of more, not only freedoms, but also larger responsibilities as to what direction do you take the business in as an entrepreneur. As an employee, you're following someone else's direction, unless you're driving that. But even then, you're still getting paid to do that. And
Correct.
so when it comes to smashing the plateau and, moving into someone who is an entrepreneur already, what are some of the trends that you've seen from your show that people can take away from the ones listening or watching to this one?
Right. So you actually alluded to some of the challenges that um, that entrepreneurs can face once they've created something that is sustainable, which is they may find after a while that what they're actually doing doesn't quite fit what they want exactly. Sometimes it's off by a little bit, and sometimes it's off by a lot. So, like in the example you just brought up, where somebody has created all this content and then gets interest in solving a problem, and there's an opportunity to teach. If they discover after they have been teaching and getting paid for that they don't really like teaching, then that's a big issue, and they've got to make a shift. Often, what happens with small business owners is they work so hard just to develop a base of clients that will pay the bills in the beginning, that they end up filling up all their time with paid work and also business development and administration with the balance. And they find that they're working much harder than they worked as an employee. They may or may not be making more money than they made as an employee, and they're feeling a little bit trapped, and they feel more like their business is running them rather than them running the business. And that also presents a whole host of problems that you need to start making some shifts and some pivots in your business if you are going to take control over your business and feel like you actually are moving in the direction of the freedom that you so badly desired when you started your business in the first place.
You're absolutely right. I also think that, for example, if many times with solopreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general, there is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, YouTube. There's all these different social media platforms, and they're having to feel this pressure that they have to be on all of them. without really taking a step back and understanding the personas, like who are the customers that they're specifically targeting, and do they live on these platforms? Instead, they're just going through the motions because they believe this is the right way of being able to grab business. And following a separate conversation also on this other app, again on this panel, we were talking about corporate clients. And corporate clients are not looking at you on Instagram or on Twitter. They are going to go through word of mouth, especially since you have multi generations currently in the workforce. And so, until you have, let's say, a Gen Z or even the Gen Alpha in senior management, where they may rely on social equity to be able to see what your worth is based on likes and so forth, it's still going to be very traditional where it's all word of mouth. So, it's a matter of coming up with the strategy to be able to figure out where do you find those clients. And so, with the pandemic that has happened, how have you seen from your guests, or what have you heard as it relates to trends that may be existing now, well, as either as a part of the pandemic or as a result of moving out of the pandemic itself?
Right. Well, one of the things that I've noticed through the pandemic is um, there's a lot of airtime and a lot of emphasis placed on the disruptions that have caused some kind of negative effect. So things like unemployment, um, um, food deserts, people, both individuals and businesses, having difficulty paying their rent. On the flip side, there have been lots of situations where both employees and business owners have done much better over the last year plus. There have been people who have not lost their jobs, whose expenses have gone down because there's way less that you can spend your money on. People are not traveling as much, if at all. Entertainment has been quite limited, so savings rates have gone up. There are people in high demand careers where compensation has gone up. There are companies where businesses have done quite well because of the pandemic. And then on the flip side, I've also seen people where their work or their business has taken a nosedive. Some of those people have kind of gone, woe is me, and have not figured out what they need to do about it. And then there are others that have made some pivots where they've done really well. I'll give you one example. I recently attended a live summit. Live summits have really taken off in the last year because people have not been able to gather in person for conferences. And there was a person who was the MC for the live summit, who prior to the pandemic was making his living as a DJ. And as we know, live in-person events that require DJs are few and far between right now. And so he figured out how to use his DJ skills to MC events, and he's been crazy busy. And I've seen other examples of businesses that have made massive pivots. People that have in-person paid speaking, for example. Some of them, their business have been without income. Others have figured out how to reposition themselves to take advantage of now all this activity of online conferences where they need speakers badly and need high quality speakers. And they've been able to sell their services and get lots of paid speaking work without ever having to leave home.
Yeah, I think those are great examples, especially when it comes to pivoting and really optimizing ways of being able to continue to work and also keep the business alive, which is in essence the crux of being an entrepreneur. It's a matter of innovation and thinking through, where do you go? And many times when, at least the mentors I've had who have their own businesses, always say you may start up with one thing and then you wind up ending with something completely different. And it's not a bad thing. It's just you have to go where the demand takes you and where people want to leverage your skill sets. Because it's like saying, okay, I may be a great singer, but people want me to play guitar. So even though my passion is to sing, I'm going to be going to guitar because that's what's going to lead into more business. And then later on, you do maybe bundle it. Now, I mean, I don't sing, but I'm just making that up as an example. But regardless, I think it's just being able to come up with creative ways to be able to be resilient and also being able to solve the problems that some organizations may be existing. And that also shows some of the entrepreneurs who have not been able to succeed because of the fact they have not been able to make that shift into coming up with creative ways. So that being said, I guess, what have you seen, or what do you think is the future of either going solo or smashing the plateau? What are your thoughts on both?
Well, personally, I think that there's going to be a lot more going solo, people going solo going forward. One of the things that we have seen is, um, a prior reluctance to allow employees to have flexibility in how they work and where they work and when they work. That resistance to flexibility from employers, I think that is now out the window. We have seen over the last year plus that an awful lot of people who thought they were never going to be able to work from home are suddenly working from anywhere. And so I think it's giving people a taste of what it's like to have more control over their own work structure, and where employers are not going to be as flexible going forward. I think you're going to see more employees going out on their own and realizing that they have a lot more control over how they work and when they work and where they work than they thought. So I think it's going to lead to a lot more flexibility and fluidity in working arrangements, which will lead to more people going solo.
Yeah, I think that's really great insight. I also, just to add, not in the US, I was talking with someone who focuses on the Mexican market, and what they were saying is that a lot of the companies in Mexico are encouraging employees to be known as intrapreneurs. So they actually are allowing companies to start building out their own businesses whilst still being an employee. So it's not a side hustle. It's like the companies are very well aware, and in some instances, making investments in those smaller companies that their employees are making. And so either going completely solo and opening up your own business, or in the instance of being in the market that I just mentioned, where companies are making that investment, there's definitely going to be value as to the rise of the small businesses. Although it kind of felt like a slow death over the pandemic, I do think that there's going to be a lot more people entering the sector and coming up with new creative ways of coming up with products or services, and really having to think through, again, how do you target your specific audience or clients that are looking for that particular solution.
Yeah,
So
two
what's
things to keep in mind, Bernardo.
Yes.
Just jumping off on what you just said. One is that every large company started as a small business. So small business leads to the future. Second is, if you look back over history, a disproportionate percentage of the long-term successful companies were started during a recession.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And that's why I think there's going to be a rise of a lot more solopreneurs. And also the fact that, if I think about, in parallel to that, just marrying it with education, for the last maybe 10, 15 years, you've seen a lot of undergraduates go into graduate school and getting into significant amount of debt. And I think the newer generations are realizing that there's a lot of debt to be made. And it's not to minimize the importance of education, but I also see a trend as it relates to education moving more into certifications or micro certifications versus going through the full degree. Like, for example, if you're going to go into IT, many professors are not incented to learn the latest technology. They're incented to get tenure. And as a result of that, you wind up going through smaller workshops or summits or something of that sort, where you can learn either Python. I'm digressing a little bit, but what I'm getting to is the fact that with the parallel of education, I think there's going to be more interest in either trade work or actually going out on your own and creating your own company itself. So I definitely agree with you there. I was being very mindful of time, and I'd like to get your thoughts as to what's next for you, what's next for Smashing the Plateau, going solo. And if you're watching, feel free to ask any questions. We're here for the next few minutes or so, but I wanted to just make sure that that any questions that are coming through, we can answer them whilst we're still live.
well, one of the things that we've been focusing on a lot, particularly on going solo, is the emotional trauma of job loss, particularly for people over the age of 50. And it's something that um, I don't see a lot of content addressing. There's a lot of content about the strategy and the tactics that you need in order to make a transition in your career or in order to start and grow a business, but there's not a lot about the actual emotional toll that that these transitions take on the people that are making the transition. So that's one of the things that we're focusing on more and more in our content. And if anybody is listening to this and wants to talk more about that, I'd be happy to have a discussion about particular instances, and there may be a fit with some of the things that we're trying to create and share. Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, um, you know, I work with individuals and groups of businesses around these issues of how do you get yourself going when you are a long-term expert in a particular field. How do you decide what kind of business is the right business for you? How do you figure out what's going to work for you long term? How do you actually make money doing that? How do you find the right kinds of clients? And if you have a going concern, how do you make some of the pivots that we've talked about when you feel like your business is running you rather than you running your business? What are some of the steps you need to take to start to have more control over your life and your future?
That's fantastic. So where can people find you then if they're interested in having a chit chat or learning more about your podcast or you?
Yeah, the best place for both is to go to Smashing the Plateau, which is the repository for both podcasts, smashingtheplateau.com. There's a contact button on there. You can get in touch with me. And as far as social media is concerned, I'm most active on LinkedIn, so you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm the only David Shriner-Cahn on LinkedIn in the world. I'm easy to find. Send me a message, ask to connect, and we'll start a conversation.
Fantastic. Well, David, thank you so much for spending your Monday afternoon with us and sharing the insights, not only about smashing the plateau, going solo yourself, and your business. So thank you again for joining.
Thank you, Bernardo.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. If you've enjoyed this conversation, feel free to hit the follow button. I always am very thankful and appreciative if you've been able to watch it. And if you're watching this on replay, again, feel free to reach out at any moment at Career Insights or at Professor Tirado. And again, as David mentioned, at Smashing the Plateau. Again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, have a great day. Take care, everyone.